Hey, I'm getting rigged up to go on about just an hour fishing excursion, and I'm going to go over the top 10 reasons that I've lost giant steelhead over the last couple of years. I have lost an embarrassing number of fish over the last few years of steelheading. This has been my first couple of years getting into it, and I want you to learn from my mistakes so that you can go home with more fish in the net. So to start off with, number one mistake, not setting the hook properly. The number of times, this actually happened to me last Wednesday, where I think I'm snagged on a log and then give it a little weak sauce hook set, don't really keep tension on the line because I'm trying to get the snag free, and then all of a sudden it starts swimming away and head shaking, and then it's off. It happens way too often. So steelhead, they're big, powerful fish. They don't always respond the same way every time that you hook one. So sometimes they strike and you set the hook and they just take off like a rocket. Other times it's a really light bite, you set the hook and they just sit there. And then you're like trying to break off your line thinking that you're snagged, and then this 12-pound fish just starts swimming away, pop, you're done. So they say that hook sets are free, depending upon your rig setup. Hook sets are either free or they cost you like $1 or $2 if you lose a jig to a log. So not always free. But fishing, nobody ever said fishing was a cheap sport. So it can be, but it's not always. So that's the number one reason that I've lost the most big steelhead. Number two is poor line quality. I've gotten a couple of bad batches of spools in the past, and I've just switched over to two particular lines that I really love. So for float fishing, I use Suffolk Siege because it has more abrasion resistance. I use that for my main line. Works phenomenally well. I barely ever break off with that. And then for my leaders, I use Sunline FC Sniper. It's a fantastic, like just mind-blowingly good fluorocarbon. I'm starting to use like lighter and lighter leaders because I just find that this fluorocarbon is so good, and it doesn't weaken with knots quite as much as some of the other fluorocarbons, particularly if you do a good job of reason number three that I've lost a lot of steelhead, which is tying crappy knots. So I've always really loved the Palomar knot. I've had great success with the Palomar knot. It's a good one, I recommend it. But when you're rigging up, there's a lot of situations where it's difficult to tie a Palomar. So I've just resorted to using the trilene knot, which is where you loop it around twice around the eye so that you have that extra wrap of line around the hook to make sure that you're not getting that much abrasion, or for whatever reason, fluorocarbon wrapped around a hook eye just once, it seems to break off in more instances than not for me. So that's reason number three. And this is Pudding Pop. He's a kitten. You gotta be down there. So reason number four, low quality hooks and swivels. If the hook's not a good quality, you've seen a lot of hooks snap. That's not a good way to have it happen. Hooks can bend out. I have had swivels that have broken. It's just super frustrating because you put all this effort into getting your rig set up proper, and you get down to the river, you hook into a big fish, takes off on a run, and then the next thing you know, you come back and you've got half a swivel, or your hook's bent out. And it's just a really frustrating experience, and you can avoid that by just getting some good ones. For hooks, I like the Trout Beads bead hooks. They're great for bead fishing. Owners are great. For fishing skein, I do sometimes use Eagle Claws. They work fine too. For swivels, there's this saltwater swivel that I get at Bass Pro Shops, like a micro swivel. I think they're like $15 for like a big pack of them. But then I also got some swivels from Mr. Dirk's Tackle, and they seem to work just fine too. So that's what I'm rigging up onto right now. So I'm going to start off on my main line, which I'm using a 12-pound Suffolk Siege. I'm just going to do a Palomar knot on that. And you want to tie your knots slowly, carefully, and you always want to make sure you give them a little bit of lubricant. The friction and the heat that occur with tying a knot will oftentimes lead to line breakage, which means that you lose that 15-pound steelhead that you've been working at getting for the last couple of years. Number 5, frayed leader line. So incredibly frustrating experience, not with a steelhead, but a lake run brown trout, which if you don't know, lake run brown trout, they'll come in off of Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, and they're steelhead sized brown trout. They're amazing fish. I had one particular day where I think I was on like fish number 13 or 14, and I accidentally bumped the line with my pliers while I was unhooking a fish. And the bite was so hot and heavy, I didn't want to retie, and I was like, oh, it'll be fine. And so, of course, next thing that happens, very next drift, bobber goes down, set the hook, enormous. We're talking like 28, 29 inch brown trout, comes up to the surface and rolls and breaks my line, right exactly where I nicked it with the pliers. So, you know, lesson learned there. I retry a lot more frequently than I used to, specifically because of that fish. That was a heartbreaking brown trout. It was enormous. It was definitely the biggest brown that I've ever hooked. My biggest that I've landed was 26 inches. It was a very solid fish, but would have been nice to have one bigger than that. All right. So I got my leader line there. Number 6, incorrect drag settings. So too loose, too tight, either way is bad. Too loose, you set the hook and the fish runs off. Sometimes a reel will back spool and get tangled up. Sometimes there's just not enough tension to actually get the hook set. That's a problem. And then too tight, it's obvious you set the hook, and these fish, they're big, they're fast, they're powerful. Especially when they're fresh in and they're nice and chrome, they will take off like a rocket and they will break your line because there's nothing stopping them. A little tougher to tie knots when you're talking. Then, okay, wrong tackle altogether. That is another good reason that people lose big fish. So sometimes you're out, you're fishing for different species, or if you just, you want to use a tackle you already have, going out with a 5-weight fly rod, you could technically land a steelhead if you're really, really lucky. You could technically land a steelhead on a Mickey Mouse pole. People have done it, but having the right tackle that's designed to match these fish is going to give you the best fishing experience. Okay, this is the critical part here. Again, tying those knots, being very slow, methodical. Just really taking your time with those knots, because it can be the difference between landing a big fish and not landing a fish. Cut off the tag end there. And then mismatch tackle. So one of the first steelhead that I ever hooked was actually on Lake Michigan. And I was fishing a big Oslo spinner on a 11-foot noodle rod with 6-pound line, because I was just in early days of my trout fishing experience, and I'd read in a magazine article that was a good rod for fishing for them. In the reality, somebody was using that type of rod for bottom bouncing on some sort of area where that light tackle was appropriate. But a 6-pound line on basically a noodle rod with an Oslo spinner, it's not going to go well. So that steelhead took that spinner, took off, popped my line just like that. So there's you want to be able to match your line strength to the rod rating, various things like that. Like for example, here on this rod, it's a 12-foot rated 6-pound line to 15-pound line. So I have a pretty big range that I can use on that. So right now I'm using 8-pound fluorocarbon. That'll work great with this rod. There's other times where I've got a medium heavy lamoglass rod that I'll use for salmon sometimes, and I like to fish for them in clear water up close, and I do get more strikes with lighter leaders, but the rod's rated for 10-pound line. So when I put 8-pound on that, I'm just breaking leaders all of the time. So I just switched, and now I use 12 pounds to 10-pound, and it works phenomenally well. I land a lot of fish. It's just making sure that your whole system's matched up, working well together. Like an example of that, And so I've got my Colville reel here. I've got the 12-pound Suffolk Siege. I've got that down to the 8-pound fluorocarbon. And the reason I have that mismatch between my main line and the leader is because if I'm going to catch fish, I'm going to be near the bottom, and I'm going to end up getting some degree of breakage or snaggage of this jig. So I'm going to lose some jigs. It's just part of fishing. So I would rather lose the jig, which is like $1, compared to losing the $6 float and the whole setup and having to retie over again. So it just saves a lot of time to have it matched so that your line is an appropriate strength for the river that you're fishing. So if there's a lot of snags, you might want to bump it up to 10. But also match to your tackle so that you can maximize your time spent fishing, which gives you more opportunities to catch big fish. Number 9 is missing strikes by not paying attention. I see this so often when I'm fishing with my buddies. Most of my buddies I fish with, phenomenally good fishermen, but sometimes people aren't paying attention, maybe hitting the fish whistle a little bit too much, and then they're just missing strike. And these takes are really, really subtle sometimes. Sometimes you actually just see the bobber will just little like bounce up and down. It won't actually go under. You set the hook and surprise, you've got a fish. So just really being attentive to the float, to what it's doing, to your lure, to your line, to what it's doing, that's going to get you those extra strikes so you can get those big fish. The number of times that I've just set the hook because something seemed off and there's been a big fish on the line is a very high number of times. And then the 10th and the last is, this can be really frustrating because this is usually your buddy when it happens with, is improper fish handling and netting. So a lot of times your buddy will get excited and they'll want to go to try to net the fish way too early, or maybe you will, maybe you'll horse the fish. So these steelhead, a lot of times they'll take off on a run, then you'll get them worked back in. A lot of times they still don't really know what's happening yet, and then you go to try to land them, they get that second rush back, and then boom, they're gone, they break off. Or they come back in like that, and your buddy's there in the water, and the next thing you know, they're all wrapped up in the line, they're bumping the fish off at the net. You want to make sure that you tire the fish to an appropriate amount to where you can lead it head first into the net. So, there's a lot of videos out there, I'm sure, on proper netting technique, but you want to bring the fish upriver, have the net downriver, bring the fish in head first right into that net, scoop it up, and that's going to give you your highest success with that. So hopefully that helps you guys to land more big steelhead. I know my intention this year is to land a lot more big steelhead myself. I finally got over that 10-pound mark, which isn't the biggest fish in the world, but you got to start somewhere. And making sure that I've got everything set up better than I had in the past, I've noticed that my success ratio has gone up tremendously. So hope that's helpful.